Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. Max Verstappen back on pole position for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix after an absolutely epic qualifying session with a big talking point, of course, Lando Norris, the current championship leader, in the wall in the final part of qualifying on a weekend where he needed a big bounce back at a track that he's not gone so well at over the last few years. He has made life once again very challenging for himself after all of the negative self-talk and doubt over the last several days really at this point from Lando Norris. Is today going to be a crucial day from a mentality perspective going forwards? Is he going to be able to bounce back from this tomorrow? But Max on the front row and Oscar Piastri looking to take advantage. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. So much to get into today. We're going to move on swiftly from this. We're going to start here. Max Verstappen back on pole, of course, today. But there was a rumour emerging today that if Red Bull can't put it all together, and sometimes they can, to be honest, I wasn't expecting Red Bull to be able to deliver here in Saudi quite as well as they have done. I thought it would be better than Bahrain for sure, but I didn't think it would be as good as Suzuka. But it has been. I mean, Tsunoda was in the mix as well at some point. He was at least able to get through to Q3 again. But it was a bit of talk on Max today. Andrew Benson from the BBC mentioned that he had heard someone close to Max told him that, and unprovoked by the way, he just said that this guy told him this, that maybe Max is considering taking a sabbatical where he would, after this season, take a year off and then come back in 2027 where he can effectively pick what team he wants to go to, kind of like what Alain Prost did in 1992 when he took a sabbatical. He came to Williams in 93 and won the championship. That could be a plan for Max. He's got a child on the way. Who knows who's going to be the best next year, but it's probably not going to be Red Bull because their engine is probably not going to be at the races. But this year, Max Verstappen still thinks that he's got a chance, and for good reason with the way that he drove today. Man, Saudi quali is just spectacular. It might be my favourite session of the year. I know people talk about Monaco quali, but watching these cars on the edge is something else around this circuit. As dangerous though as it can be, and it can catch drivers out, and important drivers at that. Toto, when he was asked about signing Max, says, no, I'm happy with my relationship, so I'm not going to flirt elsewhere. So, you know, I think that's pretty clear what he means by that. Yuki, I think it's nice to see Red Bull supporting him down to the wire. I mean, they're clearly pretty committed to making it work for him and the team. They're actually going to give him some more preparation between Jeddah and Miami. That's the plan for them. But let's talk about what happened on track today. First of all, Ferrari. I mean, honestly, Leclerc, who has always done a mega job around this circuit, wasn't that far off pole in the end. He put in a really good lap, but it's still just not good enough, even with both of the Ferraris taking brand new engines. New ICEs, new turbochargers, new MGUHs, new MGUKs, new energy stores as well. So, you know, everything, or new exhaust system, sorry, not energy store. There's only a couple of those this season. They won't replace that one quite yet, but yeah, all of those things brand new in the car on a weekend where Red Bull did the same thing, probably feeling like they needed that extra boost in a straight line, which, to be fair, turned out to be true and potentially very, very valuable indeed for Max Verstappen as it comes into tomorrow's Grand Prix. This was Tsunoda ahead of Piastri. Wasn't so happy about him in practice. Again, Ferrari was struggling. Hamilton struggling to get on top of the car. Hamilton's qualifying today was, you know, wasn't good at all, but it wasn't actually that bad, I think, compared to where people thought Hamilton might be. But again, when it comes to those final couple of tenths and when, you know, the pressure's really on to extract the performance, but the thing is, for Hamilton, he at least got a lap in, and that's the point, right? Like, it wasn't a great quali, but he did at least put a lap together, which is going to put him P7 on the grid for tomorrow, which is better than P10, and we'll certainly get to that in a second. But Hamilton, him and Lando have shared some similarities in some of their talk recently. I mean, this was from Hamilton here. Normally, Saturday goes backwards, but there's not a lot more backwards for me to go. So, look, at the end of the day, he's still qualified in a reasonable position for tomorrow, given the strength of that Ferrari car right now isn't really there. But it's, of course, nowhere near right now where he wants to be, and that's deeply problematic to try and figure out why he's lacking right now in that Ferrari. Maybe the race is going to be better. To be honest, he's qualified better here today than he has done in recent times around this track, so in the Grand Effect era, so maybe it's not all negative. But at the end of the session, it was very clear that the McLarens were the car to beat. I mean, Norris put in a 127.4, Piastri put in a 127.5, and last year's pole and the lap record was a 127.4 mid. So Norris nearly broke the lap record in the third part of practice. So it was looking like there was no way they could be stopped. But, well, it turns out that Max Verstappen felt differently. And the McLaren, when it really comes down to it, the final part, the final session, they don't always have the answers. And at least the fact, yeah, the car is great, but it's not exactly 2014 all over again, right? It is competitive at the front. We are going to get different pole sitters. I feel like at some point this year, George Russell's going to be able to stick it on pole, and I thought that he was going to do it today. I was kind of believing that George would do it over the last few days. I was talking about the fact that I felt it was likely, and honestly, watching that Q3 lap from George today was one of the best qualifying laps I've seen. That first sector, the second sector was just sensational. Wasn't quite enough in the end, but I think George was extracting every last ounce out of what that Mercedes was capable of today. But let's get into qualifying, because Albon does a 1:28.8 and Norris immediately dunks 8/10 on his head. Obviously the track evolves over time, right? But that was a pretty solid early lap there for the McLaren. It then continued. Piastri took it away by 7 thousandths, and we certainly saw some very tight margins going on today. The Mercedes wasn't really there in the first couple of sessions, but the thing is with Jeddah, it's not about setting a pole time. It's about making sure you get through to the second part of practice, or the second part of qualifying, right? Like, what you don't want to do is crash. That's the worst thing you could do. And, well, we'll see that in a second. The end of Q1 was actually fascinating. So Norris, Piastri, Antonelli, Verstappen, Albon put in a good lap here. Russell was there or thereabouts. But it was all to play for at the bottom of the field. And this was Fernando Alonso getting a nice toe off Jack Doohan here before he started his fast lap. And he got through pretty impressively to Q2. Couldn't get any further, unfortunately. I will say today was a big day for Liam Lawson, I thought. Because I know that it's not like the Racing Bulls was great, but he actually put in some solid laps. He was beating Hadjar, was faster than Hadjar. And today, if you guys saw Formula 2, the feature race was won by Arvid Lindblad in only his third or fourth weekends in Formula 2. He is the man that is almost certain, he's 18, to get the Red Bull drive next year. Not the Red Bull drive, probably, the Racing Bulls drive in the sister Red Bull. It's almost guaranteed, as far as I'm concerned, that they are going to put him into the car, especially with the recent performance of Behrman, Antonelli, and other rookies that have done a great recent job. It's inevitable that that will happen, I think. So it means that Hadjar versus Lawson is a straight dogfight for that second seat. I think that Hadjar's had the upper hand so far. Today, Lawson bit back. I want to give more credit again to my boy Ollie Behrman. I thought that he did an unreal job. That Haas is not very good around here. It doesn't play to its strength as a car. Ocon was out very early on, P19. And Ollie Behrman put in a lap that was really very impressive indeed. And it was super tight in Q1, getting into Q2. Behrman made it comfortably in the ends. Didn't quite happen for him in Q2, but I still thought it was definitely one of the drivers of the day, notable anyway for that performance, given the Haas and its performance around here, and the fact that Ocon is a very tenured teammate. Hamilton just about squeaked through. I mean, he made it relatively comfortably, but he had to burn a couple of sets of tyres. Man, that Ferrari, they were really expecting, I think, this weekend to be a good step forward for them. But again, Ferrari, it's the absolute classic. Whenever you think they might deliver something, it all ends up going the opposite direction. Here's Max Verstappen taking P1, a 1:27.5 he put in here, just ahead of Oscar Piastri, and this was at the end of Q2. So it did look like at this point it was going to be basically Max versus the McLarens for pole, and at the end of Q2, here's Lando with a 1:27.4. That's a pretty nice lap time. Doohan, by the way, went out in Q1, which was definitely a rough one for him because Gasly made it all the way to the end, as we see at the end of the session. Gasly made it through. Albon did his lap a bit earlier, probably didn't take quite so much advantage of track conditions. If Albon had gone out a bit later, he probably makes it, but a good result from Sainz today to make it through. And fair play to Yuki Tsunoda, getting both cars from Red Bull again into the third part of qualifying. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Lando Norris into the wall. So this is the entry to turn 4. This is a tricky corner, no doubt. You can get very close to the wall on the right-hand side on the entry, and very close to the wall on the left-hand side during the corner itself. But Lando's line here, well, you can actually tell in this image, he is understeering a bit. He's gone in a bit too hot here, right? Like, this is his first lap of qualifying, and the incredibly frustrating thing for Lando will be, this is his first lap. If you're going to do this on the second lap of quali, I'm not saying I get it or it's acceptable, but that's the time to do it. If you're going to push every last ounce out of the car, do it in your second run. Don't do it in the first run. Get a banker on the board. Get a banker that's going to be good enough for P4, P5, even if you crash on the second lap, if you're going to go absolute balls to the wall. But he carries a bit too much speed into the left-hander, and he then bobbles all over the curb. And this is a curb that you can't hit too hard, because you hit this curb, it sends you up in the sky. You're going to be in the wall. And that's pretty much what happened to Lando here. So this was the, the full kind of part of it in full speed, very close to the wall on the right-hand side, but he just carries a bit too much speed in, and you can see that he's understeering a bit here. I know it looks like he's close to this wall, but you can get closer, and the pole laps did. And then he ends up a bit too much speed. He hits this curb hard, it bounces him over, he corrects, and by the time he's corrected again, he's smashing into the wall. And Tomo called it, right? Like, Tomo said it on his chinwag the other day that he thought Lando was going to crash, and that's what he did. But I still have a hard time believing it, right? Because Lando just looks so strong all weekends. But again, when it comes to delivering in the final part of qualifying, when the pressure is really on, and we know that Lando's talked about how nervous he gets for these qualifying sessions, especially when the pressure's on and it matters. He's championship leader, but there's not much more pressure than what was going to be a very tight qualifying session with George in the mix, with Max in the mix, with his teammate in the mix, around a circuit which is very challenging, when the championship fight is so difficult, and there's been lots of pressure on Lando over the last few days, and he makes a pretty big mistake, right, going into turn 4 early in the lap, puts it in the wall. He's okay, thankfully, and there's no issues for that, and the car will be fine for tomorrow. It's not going to be a big deal, but just the concept of the championship leader putting it in the wall in this manner in the final part of qualifying, when he looked pretty unflappable all weekend, right? I mean, Lando had been right there or thereabouts. There was, not too much doubt. I thought that Lando was going to be able to at least do something here good in qualifying. And then in the final part of quali, guess what he does on his first hot lap on these tyres, right? So, the McLaren was moved away. Lando was out of the car. He's going to start P10 for the Grand Prix, of course, tomorrow. And this also is interesting for McLaren just because the car got airlifted away. Like, it got put up on a crane here. So I imagine that there will probably be, for pretty much the first time this year, some photographers getting some images of the underside of this car, and maybe that's going to help out the other teams at some point to some degree. I think the big question for you guys is Norris going to be able to recover from this? I mean, it's not like the end of the world, but because it's a tricky track, right? I mean, it's one of the most challenging tracks you're going to find on the calendar. A small mistake leads to big consequences. But just the context of Russell, Piastri, Verstappen absolutely full sending it and making it work in the final part of qualifying and delivering just each of those guys, I thought, delivered a sensational performance today. Max and maybe even George, I would say, especially, just because I think the McLaren is just that little bit better. But Lando had to watch those guys deliver those great performances while he'd crashed his car out of the session. That's a difficult thing to take, especially now that it's very likely tomorrow that he's no longer going to be leading the Drivers' Championship, right? The gap is tight. Max may win, Oscar may win, but whatever happens, Lando's probably not getting up much. If he gets a podium, it'd be a phenomenal result. And maybe if the tyre deg is high, that's absolutely on the cards. But it's just one of those days where Lando will go home and think, man, how have I found myself in this spot where, as championship leader, no longer championship favourite, and certainly not as of today, but with all the questions around his mentality, then he crashes out of qualifying in a tough spot, and now those questions are going to be even, looming larger in his head. And Piastri will be, frustrated not to be on pole, but fundamentally with the recognition that he clearly has the upper hand over his teammates so far. So big talking point on whether Norris will be able to properly recover from this. And after going out, of course, at that point in qualifying, we then had the big dogs, frankly, take to the stage. And that was Verstappen, Piastri and George Russell. This was a crazy lap from Max. And as soon as he had this lap, I thought he's getting pole, because it looks like the Red Bull was right there, and it's amazing that when Red Bull get it right, and they did bring a couple of upgrades this weekend, but when they get it right, Max gives them the ability to get that extra little, 100th out of the car, extra 10th out of the car, and that's good enough to stick it on pole again. Max is on fire again today, but this lap, 1,000th up on Piastri. It wasn't really going to matter because these laps weren't going to be the pole times anyway. They were always going to be able to go faster than this because Verstappen was on a scrub set of softs because he'd lost his first run after the Lando crash. And then his second run was going to be on lower fuel, right? Because he had to carry fuel load for all of the laps that he did. So that was always going to knock off a couple of tenths anyway. So I thought probably Verstappen's pole position to lose almost, given the advantages that it seemed that he had. But then we had George Russell. And this qualifying lap was genuinely one of the most exhilarating that I've ever watched. I think George was wringing everything out of this car. Like in the first sector, he was right on the edge. I think the second sector, I don't even know the numbers of these corners, but around round about when they're like 45, 50 seconds in the lap, they've got that fast right-left-hander. It's not rapid, but it's pretty fast. It felt like he left a little bit of time on the table there, maybe. And then through the fast turn 22, turn 23, the fast chicane, I think there was maybe a bit more time on the table there. So he lost a little bit in Sector 2, but yeah, he was purple Sector 1 at the time. And it was a phenomenal lap from George, I thought, because I thought the Mercedes would kind of be there this weekend. I thought George could maybe do it. And, you know, I'm pretty pleased to say that, yeah, he was there or thereabouts. But Oscar put in a great lap behind him. And then Max Verstappen came to the party. Max is, look, that Red Bull is great in Sector 1. Max is unreal at Sector 1. I mean, he was, what did Brundle say at that 2021 quali lap, mighty through this section of the racetrack. And that proved to be the case again. But man, Max is just so icy, right? Like, I think that's the point. That's one of the factors that separates Max and Lando on a real great, I mean, you can see it everywhere. Like, Max was yellow, Sector 2, Sector 3, but his first sector, and I'm sure that there was part of that due to tyre warm-up, because on his first lap, he struggled through the first couple of turns because his tyres weren't prepped. This lap, he had the tyres hot and ready to go for the first sector, and that gave him a big advantage. He gave back some of that advantage, but it was enough to get the lap record, beat Oscar Piastri out for pole, and just deliver another great performance under pressure. I think that's my key takeaway, really, is that Lando, pressure on, final part of qualifying, what does he do? Put it in the wall. Max, pressure on, final part of qualifying, he sticks it on pole by 100th, right? And the lap before, he was on pole, provisional pole, by 1,000th. Like, that's the difference that Max can make, and the reason why, even if he doesn't win this year's championship, which he probably won't, so let's be real, he is still the man to beat, and why whatever Mercedes say about their situation, and I think Russell did such a good job that, like, it's impossible to say that he should be dropped, but, like, you know, Verstappen is still Verstappen, and I think today proved that again. Antonelli couldn't quite get on par with George. He was down in P5. Leclerc was P4 in the end. A great lap from him, to be fair, in that tricky Ferrari. Hamilton was quite a way off Leclerc, a good half a second, to such a degree that Sainz out-qualified him for that, I think, the second weekend in a row, and that's a big deal. I'm sure that Sainz is going to be happy about that. I'm sure that Sainz is not going to make it easy at all for Hamilton to try and get past tomorrow. Norris in P10, Gasly P9, Yuki P8. Good result from him, really. It's funny because Max on pole, you'd think that a Yuki P8 should be better than that, but that is the best qualifying result for a Verstappen teammate since Baku last year. Like, think how outrageous that is, right? Kind of insane. But what a qualifying session. That's where we're going to leave it for today. Very much interested to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Can Lando Norris recover tomorrow? Thanks all as well for tuning in. I did like a little live show before quali today, and there was loads of you guys in there. It was like 1,500 people watching live. It was mega. So appreciate all of that. I may run it back again before, like, quali and race days when the time zones are good and they work. I may run just a little hour, like, live show just to chat with you guys, talk about what's going to happen, and make some predictions that some of them will be good, some of them will be bad. That was certainly the case today. So thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.